Hey guys, Mrs. Karaz here. Today we're starting chapter 20, The United States Looks Overseas. And I'll warn you guys that this is one of those bridge chapters that contains a lot of information that's necessary to get us from point A to point B. In this case, to get us from industrialization and the progressive movement into World War I. So we start with chapter 20, section 1, Eyes on the Pacific. And here we go. So, for 250 years, Japan had blocked outside trade and prevented foreigners from visiting their country. In 1853, and yes, we're jumping back pre-Civil War because we hate this textbook, Commodore Matthew C. Perry, from the U.S., went to Japan to try to convince them to open their country to trade. And at this point, Perry brought a letter from the president asking for trade rights for America. But Perry also brought powerful ships and many guns. So there's this letter saying, like, oh, hello, please, we are being polite and asking you to trade with us. And then there's also these violent weapons in the background behind the letter, right? Saying, if you don't trade with us, I wonder what will happen. So in 1854, Japan signs a treaty opening their doors to trade. What do you know? So yes, there was like an implicit threat there, but also the Japanese saw how weak their own technology really was at the time when they compared it to Perry's fleet. So at this point, the Japanese start industrializing because they want to be able to compete internationally, right? They want to be able to hold their own. So moving through time and space. So in 1867, Alaska was a colony of Russia. Russia decides to sell this colony. U.S. Secretary of State William Seward favored expansion. He wants to see our country grow. So he wants Alaska because he thinks it's going to provide a powerful connection to the Pacific. So Seward purchases Alaska for $7.2 million, which is approximately 2 cents per acre. And of course, this seems like a bargain to us, but people thought this was, at the time, people thought this was ridiculous. They called Alaska Seward's Folly because they thought it was a completely foolish purchase. Like, you just paid $7.2 million for a freezing cold, iced-over wasteland. What are you doing, man? Their perspective will change, though, when the Alaskan gold rushes come between 1897 and 1898. We'll see that this land actually is very, very valuable. And in fact, it was quite a good deal. So, obviously, these first two slides seem disconnected from each other, but we're really talking about the way our nation would expand or not at this time period. And there are three different ideologies about about how expansion should take place, let's say. So first of all, there's this idea of isolationism, right? Saying that one nation should avoid involvement in other nations' affairs, right? Mind your own business, don't have anything to do with anyone else if you could avoid it. So George Washington, right, when he left office, he advised us to steer clear of permanent alliances. He didn't think that being involved with other countries was going to be good for us in a long-term sense. So isolationism really was our way of life for a very long time. Another ideology is imperialism, right? That we should build empires by imposing political and economic control over other people around the world. And obviously this is popular in Europe, but we were produced by British imperialism, right? The colonies were an extension of British imperialism, and we didn't like it. We claimed independence from that. So we don't want to be an imperialistic nation. We know that much. The third idea is expansionism, expanding a nation to include new lands. And when we think about it, right, Manifest Destiny was a form of expansionism. We weren't unhappy being restricted to the 13 colonies. So people wanted to move west and west and west and west and claim all this territory for the United States. And that was expansionism, building our country. But once we achieved Manifest Destiny, right, some people thought we should expand to lands outside of the continental U.S. just because it's not, like, clearly within our land mass doesn't mean that we can't have political sway there. And the idea was, if we expanded outside of the continental U.S., that means we could have political and economic growth, and our American values, our democratic ideals, could also spread with us. So expansionism becomes kind of the leading idea of the time that we are studying. So in 1893, I like this idea. Frederick Jackson Turner, who was a historian, proposed the idea that the western frontier defined American history. His idea was that westward expansion built a sense of individualism, right? You could always, if you felt like you didn't fit into a box here on the East Coast, let's say, you can move west, there'll be new territories to establish, and you can establish those territories to fit whoever you are, and you could be you, and you could, do your own thing in the West on a completely blank canvas, let's say. It also spread democratic values, right? If people have their say in government, what's more democratic than moving to an unsettled land and determining how it'll be run, right? So Turner said that once the frontier closed, once there was no more land in the West to expand on, America closed the period of history that gave it its strength, right? The idea that if now there's nowhere to go, people don't have options, and that kind of American spirit is fading. Some people, like Theodore Roosevelt, thought we needed to find a new frontier in order to maintain our strength, right? We need to find new places that we could expand on, and that's going to help us kind of re-spark this American spirit. Today, people basically disregard the Turner thesis, but back then it had some sway. People thought there was some weight to it. All right, so we're going to link expansionism to economic growth. So at this time, right, we've just studied the period of industrialization. Industries in America are working really efficiently, and they're able to successfully produce more goods than Americans alone could buy, right? So at this point, concurrently, European nations are taking control of lands in Africa and Asia. And America's starting to get scared that if European nations are controlling all of these lands, that means we're going to be closed out of global markets. We're going to lose markets for the products that we're producing. And we're going to be cut off from natural resources because everything will be going to those European nations that have power. So Alfred T. Mahan, an author and naval captain, he said that a successful nation comes from a successful trade system. And a successful trade system comes from a strong navy, right? So this is going to help influence how we evolve. And let's turn to the island chain of Samoa. I know that all of these things seem so unrelated, but I promise it will all click together by the end of the chapter. So, Samoa is a chain of islands in the South Pacific. The U.S. wants to set up coaling stations there where the Navy and steamships could stock up on coal, which was used for fuel, right? And Britain and Germany want Samoa for the same reason. We all see this as a powerful, docking point. So Britain, Germany, and the U.S. send warships to Samoa in 1889. Before any fighting can occur, there was no set plan to fight. We're just ready for it should it happen. A typhoon comes and destroys most of these ships. So that's that. In 1899, 10 years later, the U.S. and Germany decide to split control of the Samoa Islands. I'm not quite sure why Britain pulled out of the picture, but we can look at that together. So now we have some type of footing here in the South Pacific. All right, looking at Hawaii. So again, just like with Alaska, we want more control on the Pacific. And the U.S. wants Hawaii because it's relatively close to Asia. So we think if we have Hawaii, it could help us make political, economic, and military connections to countries in Asia. So in 1820, way back in 7th grade social studies land, American missionaries went to Hawaii, and their goal was to convert people to Christianity and to set up plantations. Those plantations become pretty successful. There's a strong sugar industry in Hawaii. So in 1887, the U.S. gets Hawaiian King Kalakaua to accept a new constitution that gives the U.S. power there. And we're going to look at the specifics of this in class. When that king dies, Queen Lily, because I'm going to butcher her name, comes into power, and she favors Hawaiian independence. She doesn't want to see Hawaii being dependent on the U.S. So she ignores that part of the Constitution. She doesn't want to see U.S. having power in Hawaii. So now, cut to 1893, where American planters decide to organize an uprising. These are American planters living in Hawaii. So, without permission from the U.S. government, the planters get 50 U.S. Marines to come to Hawaii and help overthrow the Queen. And they're successful. Queen Lily comes out of power. At the time, Grover Cleveland is our president, and he refuses to annex Hawaii since the planters went behind his back, right? Our Marines were doing things outside of the president's orders. No, not on my watch, Cleveland says. I'm not going to praise this really bad behavior. President McKinley, who follows Cleveland, decides to annex Hawaii anyway, and it became an official U.S. territory in 1898. Just jumping further around the world, as we do. So now we're in China. China was divided into spheres of influence, or areas where another nation had political and economic control. Originally, the U.S. was excluded from this process. But in 1899, John Hay, who was our Secretary of State at the time, sends a letter to all the other nations that had control in China and asks them to keep an open door policy where all nations could have an equal chance to trade with China. And these other nations really neither agreed or disagreed with his request. They either didn't respond or responded in some neutral or ambivalent way. But Hay came back to the American people and said, hey, they accepted. Great, we're going to start doing business with China. All right, more China. So the Chinese disliked foreign influence in their country, right? And there's a lot of it. And they started a secret society called the Righteous and Harmonious Fists in order to stop this foreign control in China. Europeans call this society the Boxers. Get it? Boxing, fists, kind of goes together. In 1900, the Boxers rebelled, and in the process they killed many foreigners and many Chinese Christians. Foreign powers, including the U.S., responded by sending 18,000 troops to China. They ended the rebellion. They killed a lot of people. Obviously, this is a big deal, but we're only focusing on how it relates to us and our role in expansionism at this time. And here is the deal with that. So, Hay is now nervous, thinking that European powers are going to find a new way to exploit China now that the Boxer Rebellion is over. So, Hay pushes for a second official open door policy. And what he's urging is for open trade. He states that America intends to keep trading with China regardless of what happened or is happening with the Boxers. And he requested that China stay one unified country. He thought by breaking it up into spheres of influence, we were creating problems. And that is where we are going to pause for today. I know that was a massive section with so much information and so much going on at different parts of the world. I promise we're going to spend a good amount of time breaking this all down in class. Bear with me, and have a great day, guys. Bye.